Good evening and welcome to the Boulder City Historic Preservation Ordinance Ad Hoc Committee meeting for April 26, 2021. This meeting is called to order. We will now say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're now accepting public comments. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. Each person has up to 5 minutes to speak on a specific agenda item. To comment during the meeting, members of the public may call 702-589-9629.
No written comments.
Seeing that there are no comments at this time, we'll move on with the agenda to agenda item 1, which is committee review of the work plan. Any comments, changes, or updates to that? It seems as if I think we're on schedule with this, with the schedule as written, and don't think we need any changes or updates to it. So moving on to agenda item 2, committee review of the SHPO model ordinance. And here's where I will open it up for discussion. If not, would it help to have the city attorney, I guess, go over what you did up until this point?
Absolutely. At the committee's pleasure, I'm happy to go through the changes.
Thank you.
Okay. Here you can see there is a new section 1 adding a short title. This is common for ordinances. Just allows it to be cited as by a shorter name. I have amended the purpose statement to coincide with the committee's direction at the last Historic Preservation Ad Hoc Committee meeting, wherein the committee wished to incorporate A and B of the 2000 ordinance purpose statement into the model purpose statement.
Can I make a comment real quick?
Yes.
I think it was just part A of that purpose that we wanted to have in there and strike part B.
Okay.
So if we could just strike the second sentence in red, then I would think it would be great.
And is that subsection F or G? I can pull up the.
You incorporated the raised public awareness of the benefits in the purpose title. And the other ones, yeah, well, I guess it would be H and I became F and G. Yeah, provide the mechanism and enhance.
Yes, so B.
Yeah, and assist the property owner.
B of the 2000 ordinance says, this ordinance does not seek to identify or designate any specific resources as historic, nor does it prescribe specific design standards or guidelines. So I see, I'll strike that second sentence there.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you.
Next, the definitions were amended in accordance with the committee's direction on which definition to keep and which definitions to keep and which to not include. The comment on the Historic Preservation Commission and the new subsection 4, or section 4, I should say, of chapter 27. This will actually be moved when the bill is written. This entire section will be in Title 3 of our municipal code, and we're currently still evaluating whether the current committee can be converted into the newly created commission or whether new appointments will have to be made. The next changes are to the new subsection, section 6 of the ordinance. This incorporated some of the additional powers that the chair had included in her modifications to the model ordinance. As we discussed in the ad hoc committee, many of the additional authorities and additional provisions that were added by the chairwoman are things that could be added in bylaws, rules, and procedures. So I only added just the clarification that the commission has the authority to establish those bylaws, rules, and procedures, and just made another clarifying change to the new subsection D here, that the methods and procedures necessary to preserve, restore, maintain, and operate historic properties will be set forth in the design guidelines adopted in the commission. So as you can see there, we did not include the powers that were discussed or that were put forth, but that the committee could discuss that today if they so choose.
I have no further comments on that. Do you just want to go through, and when you get to a point, if we want to interrupt, we can?
Yeah.
Does that sound good? Okay.
Yeah, yes,
Rather
at
than
the
wait
committee's
till-
pleasure, yes, if there are, as I go through this ordinance, if the committee members have any disagreement or want to discuss that section, I think the appropriate time would be to do that at that time.
Great.
So, moving forward, the section 7 of chapter 27 just made some clarifying changes throughout, just nothing of substance. The community significance waivers here in subsection D, E, and F, or excuse me, E, F, and G. These there were some questions at the last committee meeting about these waivers. These waivers are, because the commission is the advisory body, the council is ultimately the authority, which is why it says the council shall be empowered to designate the community service waivers. But the commission has the authority, they make that decision based on the recommendation of the commission. So if a community significance waiver is requested, the commission would have that authority as a threshold to review and then provide that recommendation to council. To get code waivers for certain, the code waivers aren't necessarily our building code, but our historic preservation ordinance and the design guidelines and certain alterations there too. So, of course, the Planning Commission does also have concurrent jurisdiction to review and is required by NRS Chapter 278 to review certain types of variance requests and things like that. So to the extent a community significance waiver would include something that would also be included in a variance request, the change to this ordinance here that I've made simply clarifies that they still also have to go through the process in NRS Chapter 278, which would be Planning Commission review. But that wouldn't apply in every case, necessarily. Any questions on that?
I just have a question about the public hearing portion of that. It will be held at a city council meeting, so that would be technically having the public have a chance to discuss, but I hear what you're, but it's actually just the formality of the public hearing where they have extra comments during that portion. Is there any benefit to having or not having that in there?
Is it the suggestion that there would be additional public hearing requirements above and beyond what NRS requires?
Well, it just states in here, sorry. My mic's on. It says on here that the council may award such designation without further review by the commission and without public hearing.
Yeah, obviously you'd have to comply with NRS.
Right.
And
So
that's where I think the intent with the language above, it would be an additional public hearing before this commission or any additional hearings that would be above and beyond what's required by NRS. That's the intent. It can't circumvent NRS requirements.
Right. It just has a negative tone into it. I just wonder, if someone read that and was like, oh, they can do whatever they want without having the public input. That's how I think people would see that. So I'm just curious if we need that wording in there or not.
The wording isn't necessary. It definitely clarifies, because if it's a community significance waiver, again, the waiver is for this ordinance. So the provisions of this ordinance, you'd be granting a waiver. So this allows, if NRS 278 otherwise doesn't apply, this does allow you to, it makes it clear that you don't have to have a public hearing. We could definitely take that out. There's no conflict by taking that out. We can have a public hearing requirement for community significance waivers, similar to how we would do for something that was subject to NRS 278. That's definitely something that's possible. But we are, given the short timeline between this past meeting and this meeting, we are seeking guidance from SHPO as to why they have that in there, and we haven't been able to get that clarification yet.
Okay. Can we just put a star next to that or
Yeah.
something, and we can come back to that then? Any thoughts of, the public perception might be a little bit negative on the way that was worded. And I understand that, yes, they would still have council, it would go before them to decide on, and public would have a chance to talk. It just doesn't read like that for people who don't know that there's a separate, public hearing on certain items.
Any additional questions or discussion on Section 7? Okay. Moving on to Section 8, certificates of appropriateness. Again, these are minor clarification changes. Nothing of substance here. Just making it more consistent with how our ordinances are drafted. These changes do incorporate Chair's suggestion to add that we notify all property owners within a 300-foot boundary of the applicant property when someone applies for a certificate of appropriateness. So that is added, so now it won't just be immediate adjacent, but all property owners within 300 feet would be notified. And that was all the changes I had on Section 8. Any discussion or questions on Section 8?
Oh, excuse me, sorry. I did have a couple of comments, or I needed clarification. And this relates to the flow chart that I sent. I don't know if, anyway, doesn't matter. So under Chapter 8, Section C, Procedure for Review, the application must be submitted for review to the Community Development Department and approved by the Historic Preservation Office or the Commission. And I was just wondering if it should instead say the application must be submitted and strike for review, just the application must be submitted to the Community Development Department and reviewed for review and approval by the Historic Preservation Officer of the Commission. It seemed as if the Community Development Department, the way it's worded, would be reviewing, the same way that the Historic Preservation Officer or the city or the Commission would be reviewing it.
Yes. Thank you, Chairwoman. We can make that change. The intent was to make sure that, should we contract with a Historic Preservation Officer, that's someone who may not be on staff at all times. So we're making it clear the application goes to the Community Development Department, and so that your suggested changes are in line with the intent and are make it more clear. I did want to also add, I apologize, I forgot to mention, Chair, you had suggested sort of combining the administrative and commission review in reviewing those changes. I think it is better, it's staff's recommendation, Michael and I met, and that we continue to keep those separate. And the reason being is because although the changes are the differences are minor and it seems somewhat redundant, it's helpful to have, it's more clear, especially to the applicant, when administrative review occurs, when commission review occurs. And so that's why and of course it was SHPO's model ordinance recommendation. So that's why we continue to keep those separate.
So where I was getting confused, and where the flow chart that I developed helped me, is there a process where the administrative review happens first and then it goes, which is then to the Historic Preservation Officer, and then when that person does what they're supposed to do, then that's the only time then it goes to the commission? Or is there an opportunity for, or is there, God, sorry, I can't talk today. Is there an option where it could go to one or the other? And I guess what's the difference between if an applicant, if a COA is submitted, what's the difference between it being reviewed by the officer versus the commission?
I believe the default is the administrative review, pursuant to how I read the ordinance. And the Historic Preservation Officer is required to meet with the chair of the commission on every application.
So that was another question of mine. Does the chair actually wholly represent the entire commission?
Well, what triggers commission review is, the historic Councilwoman Folda, did you want to make?
Refer to, so you know where, it's under 8CA. It gives when this happens and this happens.
8C,
A.
well, yes, except when you look at 8C, it says the application must be submitted for review and approval by the Historic Preservation Officer or the commission prior to commencement of work.
And then go down to 1A, and it'll say when the Historic Preservation Officer is enabled to determine compliance with the Secretary of certain areas for rehabilitation, proposed work, it can then go to the Historic Preservation Commission.
So it's not just administrative, though. They're actually then moving on beyond the commission and moving forward to, I guess I'm wondering what the phrase administrative means. Is it like a first step? Or is it like it's administrative because of somebody who's working for the administration versus the commission?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, it's the latter. The Historic Preservation Officer is given a somewhat discretion by the statute to review it. And the idea, I think the intent behind it is that if this is a normal application wherein the applicant meets all of the SOI standards very clearly, the Historic Preservation Officer can just say, okay, yep, approved, and you have a expedient review. And in the event that they're unable to determine whether it meets the SOI standards, or in just the event that they feel that it should go to the commission, then they have that authority to forward it to the commission. That's how the ordinance is written.
Chair Davenport, I guess as a point of clarification and maybe to kind of put this in context, I asked staff to poll how many building permits are issued in a typical year within the historic district, and we just have the one historic district right now. And looking back to the definitions, obviously you have to get a certificate of appropriateness if you are altering the historic property. And the alterations, of course, are inclusive of many different modifications. And so it would be contemplated that there may be relatively minor improvements that are being made to a structure that would be in full compliance with Secretary of Interior standards and the city's ordinance. And you wouldn't want to take everything to the commission. Approximately 50 to 60 building permits were issued within the last couple of years within the district, as an example. And so I believe that at a minimum, 40 to 50 of those would need a certificate of appropriateness based on the nature of the types of building permits. And so if every one of them was coming before the commission, in addition to the other responsibilities, that would be a lot of work for the commission. And that's where the role of the Historic Preservation Officer, whatever individual or entity is providing those services for the city, ensures compliance.
I do see, Chair Davenport, what you're saying about the way the ordinance is written. It's not clear what triggers commission review as I read this subsection 2. I think that that's the intent of how I read it, is that administrative reviews the default and the HPO has the discretion, and how just echoing Michael's comments. So we can add and I think first, reach out to SHPO and make sure that's the intent here. And 2, clarify that in the event the HPO forwards this for commission review, etc., to make it more clear when commission review is triggered.
So I understand where the trigger goes which is 8C1A, proposed work, Actually, this is where I think that I see a conflict, and that is that last sentence, proposed work to all city-owned landmarks, all proposed work within a historic district, and for all city preservation-related incentive programs or federal projects must be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission. Is that at that point not bypassing, I should say, but is that a simultaneous review along with the Historic Preservation Officer?
I wouldn't say it's a simultaneous review. I think that's a trigger. It just goes to the commission. I'm sure that, the Historic Preservation Officer will, of course, review it and prepare it with their recommendation to the commissioner, their evaluation of whether it complies with the SOI standards. But you're correct in that if the proposed work is for city-owned landmarks or within a historic district, or for all city preservation-related incentive programs, that is automatic commission review.
But the statement, all proposed work within a historic district, that's still all projects in the historic district. So I guess this would be fixed when the instructions for how to fill out a COA application would be would help applicants as well as staff and the commission understand the actual process.
Yes, and we can reach out to SHPO and find out the intent here because it is somewhat inconsistent. Okay. So you bring up a great point, and we can reach out to SHPO and see what their rationale is for drafting it that way. Yeah.
Okay. If I'm confused, then God help the poor citizen of this town. So, thank you. And then I had another question, sorry. This is under Chapter 8, C2, which is the commission design review affecting landmarks and properties located in a historic district. Is there a difference between a preliminary determination versus an administrative review, or what, I guess, what is the definition of a preliminary determination?
Yeah, again, I think this is when, in the event that this does get forwarded to the commission, this is just that making it clear that the HPO still makes a preliminary determination for commission ratification. So the HPO still reviews everything and provides a recommendation, for lack of a better word. It's not really a recommendation, it's a preliminary determination. It's saying to the commission, this is my determination based on my review, and then bringing it to the commission for their review.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all the questions I had in that section.
Okay, moving on to section 9, demolition of landmarks and non-contributing properties. And most of these changes are, again, non-substantive. In subsection C here, Chair Davenport added some additional requirements for an application for a certificate of appropriateness for demolition. So I incorporated those requirements. I would recommend that subsection G just be discussed further this evening. Do you want to do that now, or do you want me to keep?
Sorry, before we move to G, under section 9B, 1A, The subject building, structure, or object is an accessory building and/or landscape feature that is not integral to the historic interpretation or integrity of the landmark. Should "or district" be added to that? Or historic district?
Yes, Chair Davenport, I think that's the intent. Or property located within the historic district.
That'll work.
And I will just say this language is still conceptual in nature. When this ordinance goes through the final drafting process, there will be a thorough and detailed review for inconsistencies such as that, to catch those types of things.
So, should we discuss G then? Unless,
Yeah, so G, if everyone recalls, this is under the subsection of demolition of a property, and it gave an exception if there was a applicant was claiming economic hardship, and so we were concerned if they would have said, oh, I just can't do it, what would they need to provide any proof or anything like that? So I think that was the discussion. I think in here we had they added the 2 written reports. And the cost analysis in there, and just big picture, we do have incentives that I think the council was working on, and that and we have the redevelopment also. Most of the historic properties are in the commercial ones at least are in the redevelopment zone. As well. So I don't know if there's anything big picture that we want to say, like it would go to one of those other redevelopment agency or to the city council or anything like that in here. Just some thoughts.
I just would also bring to the committee's attention, although there's nothing in particular that's required of the application for a claim of economic hardship. The subsection 3 on the next page does set forth the standards for economic hardship to be granted. And in addition, subsection B requires the city to adopt by a resolution separate criteria for review and claims of economic hardship. So adding this to the ordinance is somewhat conflicting in that the ordinance drafted by SHPO requires the council to set forth sort of these requirements for economic hardship. So I'm just pointing that out. So by including these things in the model ordinance, it is a significant departure from the model ordinance. So just adding to of course, the committee's recommendation, which is pointing everything out.
I would agree it is conflicting, and also the word redevelopment, I think, wasn't intended to be redevelopment, but so by striking that, this Roman numeral 1 through 3, I think, is appropriate.
Just for clarification, you're talking 1 through 3 under subsection G of number 1?
Correct.
Okay, because there's more than one.
Yep.
Okay.
So, just for further clarification, in striking 1 through 3, what would subsection G?
Sorry, all of G.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I know it. Just making sure it was Okay. Because the council could then establish by resolution those criteria and requirements for applicants as well, if for claims of economic hardship. Any further discussion before we move on?
I was just going to point out under 3B, it does have number 5, cost estimates of demolition and post-demolition plans for development. So basically what we were looking for is, or it was in there, we just didn't probably catch that last time with all the other stuff we were looking at. So I think the intent still remains, and that, yes, that it would go through the council to adopt those resolutions.
And the remaining changes to section 9 are non-substantive. Moving on to section 10. There were not any substantive changes here. Subsection 11. The committee had requested some additional penalties in exploring how other jurisdictions approach the scenario of midnight demolition, or when a person is to demolish a property without even seeking a certificate of appropriateness. So in reviewing other ordinances throughout the United States, I found that there are some penalties, and a common penalty is should someone demolish a structure either on the historic register or even on the historic inventory that has not yet been designated as a historic resource. There is a penalty for a stay of a building permit issued for a certain amount of time. So I looked and modeled Austin, Texas, and incorporated a stay of 5 years for a designated resource and 2 years for a inventoried resource. In addition, clarified the civil penalty, which is an amount to be determined for demolishing a historic resource. And there was also some direction from the committee to explore possible resolution of seeking to rebuild the historic resource. There's really the only jurisdiction I could find that does that is San Francisco. I don't know that that's something that legally the city can require by ordinance. However, I think that there is a possibility for a city to seek that remedy in a court. And so in the ordinance I made it clear that the city can seek mandatory reconstruction of the structure in a court of law if it wishes to do so, adding a right of action, so to speak.
I had a question on the section 11A1. And it starts with any person violating any of the provisions, etc. I was curious here, if not elsewhere, do you need to say any person, firm, or corporation Or does person mean the property owner, no matter who that is?
The model ordinance had person, firm, or corporation. I think that's unnecessarily limiting. Typically in statutory drafting, it's just the word person is used.
Okay.
The word person is broadly defined to include any type of entity,
Okay.
individual or entity, except a government entity. So,
Okay, thank you.
Just under number 2, the last sentence just kind of cuts off. So I don't know if we need that last sentence or not.
oh yes, the intent was to delete that whole last sentence. There's also an additional change I just saw that in modeling the Austin ordinance, Heritage Committee was in there, but that should be Commission. So make that change. Any further discussion on section 11?
Under 5, the penalty there is the not to exceed amount is just listed as X's. Is that something that we want to fill in?
The committee may fill that in. As city attorney, I'm happy to research sort of the penalties that other jurisdictions have for such a violation as well.
That would help me, because I wonder, I mean, do you have to do market analysis to find a estimate, depending on our quantity of historic properties, our population, you know, I don't know what goes into adding an actual number into a ordinance, so. I mean, I could say $1 million, but I mean, who's gonna, who am I to say that $1 million is good? I don't know what justifies that, but.
Yeah, I think that having Madam City Attorney review that and see what other jurisdictions would give us some guidance on that amount.
Happy to do that.
Thank you.
With that, that concludes the overview of the ordinance. Open for any questions. The chairwoman's changes are also provided in the packet if anyone has any questions or needs further clarification.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is a bear to work on, or maybe it isn't for you, but it's based on what our discussion was last time we met and how you've now incorporated our conversation or our suggestions and changes and explained why. It's super helpful, and I think we've got a really good ordinance here. I'm wondering if from here on out, you know, as we get input from the public or, you know, other entities, we still have that option to continue to make not changes, but corrections or updates as needed based on those updates.
Absolutely. I mean, this will be really a living document until it is brought to City Council. So the committee's welcome to bring this back and provide further review, but I think that the next logical step would be getting that community input and then incorporating those changes if necessary would be, I think, valuable.
So I guess that's my question is, we've reviewed it under this agenda item. So the next agenda item 3 is to discuss direction for public outreach. Is that where we should talk about how you will finish this? And if therefore, should we just move on to section 3?
Yeah, if
I
there's,
mean, agenda item 3.
if there's nothing further on the ordinance itself, that would be the appropriate next step.
Does anybody have anything? No? Thank you.
I'm not sure, Attorney Walker, if you recall, we had talked a lot about the maintenance repair. They had a difference between maintenance repair and ordinary maintenance. I don't know, I didn't write down.
My recollection was to go with the term ordinary maintenance.
Okay,
We've defined that to mean regular, cyclical, or seasonal care, upkeep, repair, or replacement of any portion of a historic property or resource in order to maintain a safe, sanitary, and stable condition. This type of work does not alter the exterior of the property, building structure, and does not require a certificate of approval, or that should be appropriateness, or building permit.
okay.
And if I believe it's in section,
Yeah, because I think there was an exception if there was just ordinary maintenance, and then, so yeah, to define that, so that's perfect.
yes, and it also, the minimum maintenance standards are in section 10.
Okay.
So that's additional requirements upon owners of historic properties. They have an obligation to keep it from falling into disrepair. They can be held accountable if they are letting it fall into such a state of disrepair it's beyond rehabilitation, which is referred to as demolition by neglect. So those are but yes, ordinary maintenance is carved out of the certificate of appropriateness requirement.
Thank you. So, yeah, just my last input would just be kind of fine tuning after we hear back from SHPO, the actual process of the certificate of appropriateness, who it goes to, when, and when it triggers, the committee getting involved, just getting that more consistent. Because it kind of is confusing when you go, each individual section makes sense, but when you read them as a whole, they kind of are inconsistent with one another. So.
I've seen other versions of ordinances where they actually include a flow chart. I don't know if that's too much information in an ordinance, but it would certainly be beneficial if, when we create the guidance or the certificate of appropriateness instructions. So I don't think it needs to be in the ordinance, but.
Yeah, absolutely. That's more of the function of the process, and similar to other applications and guidelines, that would be a helpful tool to give to applicants.
Any other comments, changes to this agenda item? Great. Moving on to agenda item 3 then, for possible action, committee discussion and direction on the public outreach process.
So this is follow-up from last month's meeting, and with direction from the committee on the model ordinance. As already noted, the appropriate next step is to discuss how the committee would like to reach out to the community to get input on this process and this model ordinance. So in the staff report, we talk about the various ways to accomplish that goal. Potentially, one option would be to hold 2 public community meetings or open houses. One with the residents within the community, and one with the business community. Present the overall aspects of this proposed ordinance, answer questions, and obtain feedback. In conjunction with that, making sure that the succinct overview of the proposed ordinance is provided in letters to property owners within the district, through social media, to get the word out about the proposed changes so that our citizens and businesses can understand the ordinance.
I like, excuse me, I like all of these options. They work great. I think my other question is though, can we simultaneously consult with the SHPO, the Planning Department, the Historic Preservation Committee at the same time?
Absolutely, with respect to SHPO, we want to get their input early on to provide feedback on their concurrence with the proposed ordinance. The role of this committee, it was created by the City Council. And so at some point, it would be appropriate to report back to the City Council the findings of this committee. The question is for this committee is, do you want to receive the public input first before going back to the council? Because if you do it concurrently, the council may be looking for that public input as well.
I think I would defer to the council members who are here to see what they would prefer. I guess I was thinking that if we blitz this to everybody who needs to look at it, and if that includes the city council, it's basically the city council is reviewing it at the same time that the public is. But if it's, of course, their prerogative to wait for everybody's comments to come in before reviewing it, or do they just review it because it's out there anyway? I don't know. But I defer to the council members here to discuss what they think.
I do think that review by SHPO is necessary. We don't, my feeling would be not to put a document out there that SHPO comes back and says, well, this section's not appropriate, or you need to add this, or whatever. So that part, I don't know, do we have any idea when SHPO will respond?
Well, what I have done with some of the pertinent questions that were raised at the last meeting, I sent those to SHPO asking for their review. They're going to try to get back to me soon on that. Now that we have clarified the entire ordinance, I can send the entire ordinance immediately to SHPO. I suspect it would take them several weeks to review and get back to us. I could check to see if they can provide a more expedited review on that.
Again, I just hate to withdraw something that SHPO may have an issue with.
I guess I'm wondering if this is a SHPO model ordinance that hasn't been modified that much, or substantially. If they do come back, I don't foresee it would be with any major changes, or I don't know.
Well, again, we don't know what type of responses we would get from the public. So that's a potential too, that a second review by SHPO is necessary. So,
Chairwoman Davenport, if I can offer a suggestion, I think when this is being presented to the citizens, I mean, certainly we could present the ordinance in the revised form you have here, but it'd probably be more effective to break it down into key elements of what this ordinance is trying to accomplish and get feedback with respect to that. That way, if SHPO has some suggestions on, some of the language, more of the details, it doesn't impact the public input aspect of this. Because, providing the ordinance itself, some of the citizens they may not be able to have a chance to fully understand it in its current form, but if it is highlighted what this would do, that would probably be more helpful in obtaining public feedback.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, so I would say, the SHPO timeline is not ideal, but I agree, yeah, if we could not have, well, really, when you were looking for public outreach, the process for that, to me, I think we need to start with the why before we're saying what, because this is something completely new for Boulder City as a whole. Well, we've had a 2000 code, but it really wasn't implemented. And so this is something that we're actually going to be implementing to really educate the why first. Maybe like in the flyers that go out, take that, so, why historic preservation is important, what it does for your business or your property value, and, the city is looking into this ordinance, come to this meeting and we'll talk about what that means. So it's really focused on why we're doing it, and then come to the meeting and we'll explain what it is. But yeah, to throw a document at everyone, I think it's, like, if they do see this at all, make sure it has draft written all over it, so they're sure know, because really, and if you look at our working plan, it is to get some input from the public and consolidate that to provide to the council. And so I think that would be appropriate to get the input, any modifications, and then send that to council when it's kind of, after SHPO's reviewed it, after it's been vetted by the public, and anything, this committee sees that needs to be fixed, and then consolidate for that for the council to have. Does anyone agree with that, or?
I agree, and I think too, to predicate the whole process on the fact, and I realize the survey's now 3 or 4 years old, but there was a community survey done that had a substantial number of people. I believe it was around 874 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And that's really been the impetus for this, is the response was, yes, we want to go forward with preservation. So I think pointing that survey out, that this work is based upon the results of that survey of the community earlier, would be helpful also. I don't think we need to quote the entire survey, but there were some significant questions within that survey that, again, the response from the community was overwhelming to move forward with this type of thing.
The Nevada Preservation Foundation Preservation Plan for Boulder City, its high priorities consist of implementing certificate of appropriateness for alterations and new constructions, certificate of appropriateness for demolitions, develop an appeals process for the public, update the executive tasks and powers of the HPC. They're the highest priorities, so they're all being implemented with a new ordinance. Those are the recommendations for us that have been provided by the Nevada Preservation Foundation. So would be good information to share with the public too, that it's simply a part of what is really needed, what's been recommended to us.
And I'll add that we could cite those results because they also conducted a community outreach effort. So, and there are results from that as well that what we're doing here addresses, so.
And again, I'm not sure the format to use on something like that, because, you don't want to overwhelm people with the amount of information, but you want to make sure that that information's available. So I don't know if there's something, similar to the information that was put together for the pool ballot questions, or information about the pool, where that information could be pointed to, you know, a short synopsis of why we're moving in this direction, but then point to that other information.
Yeah, like have a link to the survey that was done and the results of that input. But also going back to that survey, it provided great visuals. So if at the community meeting or workshop, whatever is, you know, kind of proposed, to have some of those visuals, you know, this is the, you know, give a couple of the different styles of homes. So you have the Spanish style and the, you know, the old dingbat houses style, and have a couple of visuals so people can relate, oh, these are the characteristics that my house has, or, you know, I've seen these in, you know, my neighborhood's house, and those are the characteristics that we're looking to preserve, and to have those kind of some visual posters available for people to, that came from that survey, say, oh, these are the characteristics that we're seeking to preserve.
Chairwoman Davenport, just as a follow-up, when this ad hoc committee was created, a lot of the material that was requested at the first meeting was posted to the city's website. So certainly, as part of the outreach effort, we would be highlighting that link so that people can explore that material and gain additional background information in advance of the public meeting.
So if we agree that these options are what we're going, that we're going to use these options, I guess, do we need to review them before they go out, or we just hand it off to you and it's all good?
Well, I guess I'd have a couple more questions. What role would the committee want to play in the public outreach effort? And in terms of the ability today with responding to COVID and giving everyone the opportunity to provide input, one of the things that has limited the community in terms of public outreach has been this room is the only room where you can videotape and have people interact remotely. If we were going to have this somewhere else, then that ability wouldn't be there. So I guess guidance on the venue from this committee's perspective on where to hold this event.
Couldn't we could just hold it here and invite people to make a reservation to well, I was going to say to make comments and then leave and allow someone else to come in, but then they would miss out. They wouldn't be able to see the meeting, so I guess that wouldn't work.
Could we just have one meeting or two that are filmed? And does it have to be filmed? I mean, what if we were to go to the park and just make a presentation? And we just designate somebody to take notes, or ask people to submit maybe a questionnaire or comment and drop it off. I don't know. But does it have to be filmed?
Well, only if you're looking for people who are viewing the meeting remotely who want the opportunity to maybe call in so they can observe whatever is being said, ask questions remotely. I mean, the other option, similar to what we've done with some of the other public outreach efforts, is we just simply promote that you can attend this meeting. You can email your comments and questions to this email address, and that's another way to address it.
I think, too, we shouldn't confuse that if this is a staff presentation, that's not a meeting. Again, I think we need to be careful of assuming that, you know, we're doing this because of the open meeting law. But if it's a presentation, that requirement is not there. I mean, members of the committee can participate in that. We would not be able to obviously deliberate on any items, but, you know, I think what Mr. Mays is saying is essentially we do a virtual presentation. It's not so much a meeting, but a virtual presentation, and allowing the public the opportunity to view that in real time and call in and ask questions and that. So in that sense, it's similar to a meeting, but it is a presentation.
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear. It's the nature of this room that I think people envision it as a meeting. It's not intended to be a meeting. It is intended to be a public engagement, informal. It's just that this venue provides the opportunity for people who maybe don't feel comfortable participating in person to still be a part of the process.
It does not have to be, I guess, it would have to be broadcast so that people could participate, but it doesn't necessarily have to be posted later either, because again, the open meeting law doesn't apply to that sort of meeting.
What about, you mentioned basically two groups, if not three, the general public, residents, and I don't know if you meant just residents of the historic district, and then business owners. Would it make sense to have 2 or 3 separate presentations? It wouldn't prevent people from calling in though, you know. You can't, you know, if somebody calls in and says, I'm a resident, it's like, oh, sorry, we're only talking to business owners tonight. But I mean, that's just one way to concentrate it in some form, unless we go to some other venue outside, you know, to meet them there rather than having them come to us.
Perhaps to simplify this and help facilitate moving forward with this effort, we would look at having a public event held here. We would invite the community in general and send letters directly to the residents that live within the district, because they would be most immediately impacted by the ordinance changes, and then broadcast it so that people could call in or email questions or comments. And then separately, we could work with the business community within the historic district and have a meeting with their group somewhere else, just to provide the same information, the same opportunity for input.
Is that something that you foresee, I guess, designating somebody specifically within the business community or the Chamber of Commerce to help with that effort, or it runs the gamut, I guess?
Yeah, I could certainly reach out to the Chamber, for example, to get the word out. Mm-hmm. But we would have all of the contact information for the businesses and could reach them directly too.
We do have an economic development coordinator that works closely with the business community, so.
Mm-hmm. My input, I would prefer like a workshop, either outside or maybe at the Smith Center that has more occupancy capability. I feel like meetings in here are just kind of sometimes too formal, and people often don't want to get up and participate because they don't want to be filmed or, you know, that kind of thing. So it doesn't have as much open dialogue in this kind of setting. That's just kind of my input on this.
And I agree with you. It's the whole pandemic thing. How would that function? I mean, if we schedule it outside, which is the safest way to do it, and we have days like we've had the last couple days with the winds, but, you know, we can certainly look for a venue that's large enough and might provide sufficient distancing, although the distancing requirements are now lesser.
I like having both, because as you said, there may be people who are still uncomfortable meeting in person. But I totally agree that getting outside and meeting people has a lot of benefits. Have there been any such events?
Spring Jam will be coming up in a little less than 2 weeks.
That's the guinea pig to see how that works. So there's been nothing at the Smith Center except for the COVID, the vaccine.
The vaccine's been, yeah, that's been occupying
all.
that.
Okay.
I mean, we can certainly look at that as the vaccine ramps down. That would be an opportunity to hold it there. I guess from a staff perspective, if the committee can provide me broad direction, then I can talk to our staff about development of materials, community outreach, and come up with the action items to proceed with the public outreach effort. I think what I'm hearing is principally two outreach efforts, one to our citizens and one to the business community. Utilization of various forms of communication to get the information to them, linking the information that we have put together, the history and the materials like the historic preservation plan that have been developed, linking that information to the citizens so that they can review that material with greater understanding, and then developing material that explains the why and explains the pertinent elements to what this ordinance contains so that people can understand and provide feedback.
And perhaps something that could be done is if there was a presentation, as we've been discussing, you know, at that presentation, the invitation could be made to the public that, you know, an event would be scheduled wherever, Smith Building or what might be appropriate, and use that as a lead-in to having that in-person event.
So you're saying doing a presentation online, you know, or first, and then have additional acknowledgement that we could do an in-person one in the upcoming as things open up and time allows.
Right.
In getting comments from the public and or the business community, is there something we could do to make that, to streamline that? I don't know, you mentioned, I think the pool question, there's a separate website perhaps for that? I'm not sure. And I don't know if it's seeking public input, but is there a place to that people can press a button that says, we want your input, and they press it, and then they can, you know, add it there? Or are you just looking for people to go and do it the old-fashioned way of mailing it or sending an email to a city staff person? I'm just wondering if there's a way to, I guess, simplify getting people's comments, not only simplify it for them to, you know, submit comments, but to gather and collate those comments. Kind of like a survey, but not really, you know.
I think to accomplish the goal of getting as much public input as possible, it is giving them various ways to provide that input, whatever is easiest for them.
And a thought I had on the letter going out to property owners within the historic district is to identify what category that property is currently in, whether it's a contributing property or non-contributing or recoverable. And Mr. Mays had made the suggestion of the map that was done by Northwind when they did the resurvey that shows the status of each property.
That would be good to have at the meeting, like maybe a printout of that, but I think it might be confusing if someone got a letter that says you're non-conforming or non-contributing.
Yeah, they're
Then
very
they say,
difficult.
then they think I'm not involved in this, or I don't have a way to recover and become part of that contributing again.
Yes, and I agree. This is an awful lot of information for people in terminology that is not commonly used. So there's always that danger of, information that overwhelms rather than informs.
I'm used to, I guess, if this were a, public outreach presentation, I could see, or like what we do in Historic Preservation Day, posters of a map and, the different styles of homes that, that people could go and just look at, But I don't know that that's not really possible if we were to do a venue like that here, unless it were a PowerPoint that was presented at the same time as we're seeking, input. Seems a bit cumbersome, but it's doable.
I think what I'm hearing is, and again, going back to the overall theme, you want to try to reach as many people as possible, answer as many questions as possible, explain why we're here. And so I think the recommendation or suggestion of a PowerPoint presentation that can be shown, people can access that. It provides a lot of the pertinent information to help raise understanding and awareness, and then invites them to a meeting where you can accomplish some of the people being able to look at boards and ask questions in a more informal setting, so that it gives the chance for people to provide input in a couple of different ways.
That works.
So, Chairwoman Davenport, just to clarify, staff would work on preparing a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, that we would use social media and other ways to get the word out for people to view. Through that process, we would invite them to a meeting. We'd look at potentially the Smith Building to hold that meeting, creating displays that help to explain and provide background information, and at that meeting, receive additional input. Obviously, both through the PowerPoint presentation and at that meeting, we would encourage people to provide us their input any way that they wanted to, collect all that information. And I think hearing from everybody, we'd also look to engage the business community as well through a separate opportunity. Does that encapsulate everything?
Yeah, and just the flyer that goes out would highlight the benefits of historic preservation, and then invite them to the links and for more information of where they can, learn about what the process is, drafted right now, or what we're looking at, and we need your input. But not giving them a ton of information in the flyer, but just more like, this is the benefits, and this is what we're looking at moving towards. Here, you can find out more here.
And again, I think prefacing it with that, the results of the survey, the results of the preservation plan, not going into detail about that, but those are the reasons why this is moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Right. And nowadays you can just put a link on there and say, this is where you can read more about it, so
Yes.
having those links would be great. Here's 300 pages you can read.
Yeah, again, it would be very easy to overwhelm people with the amount of information available.
So how does this, how long does this process last, do you think? And again, I'm curious if we can use the same information or versions of it for both the Planning Commission and the Historic Preservation Committee. Or are we waiting first? Do we have to wait for public input first, as well as SHPO, before we move forward with either the Planning Commission? I think the Historic Preservation Commission, we can just give them an update and as we go along, which we've already done. But I guess I'm still unclear, where does the Planning Commission fit in all this?
Does it come into all of this, the Planning Commission? Do we have to go before the Planning Commission with this? Or are we just presenting it to the City Council?
Ultimately, yes, because the current historic preservation ordinance is contained in Title 11 of the City Code. Any changes to Title 11 are reviewed by the Planning Commission. So, and then I'll go back to deferring to the council members as to when that engagement with the council occurs, but because this ad hoc committee was created by the City Council, it's appropriate eventually to go back to the City Council and report out your findings and have the City Council provide direction to staff on how to proceed. That direction would be preparing an application for a text amendment to Title 11 to review the proposed changes. That process includes a public hearing before the Planning Commission, where they make recommendations on that text amendment, and then it ultimately goes to the City Council for final consideration. First through a bill introduction, and then within 30 days, action by the council.
I guess my question is, would it be worth it to give a presentation to the Planning Commission on where we are at this point? I think I'm going to go ahead and suggest that for the Historic Preservation Committee, because they can help us with the outreach, or I would hope that they could help with some of the outreach. And Ray and I can bring that up at our next meeting, maybe this Wednesday. If we can sneak it in on topics for the next agenda, which would be in May. But for the Planning Commission, do you think it's worth it to just give them a presentation? We're not asking for their, for an action, it's just a presentation. Or should we just wait until it's needed?
The way I would look at it, and it would be the same as the item being referred to City Council, until it's ready to go, meaning the text amendment and that sort of thing. Because I think you can do a presentation at that time. Would that be part of the packet that the presentation could be made to the Planning Commission as
Yes.
to how it got to that point
Mm-hmm.
at the time the text amendment was being considered?
Right.
And again, in my view, that would also be the process to use with City Council as well.
I agree. I think we're still in draft form and we want to have some vetted input from the public and then amend any of those, from that, amend anything that comes from that input before we start throwing it out to other people to view. Because I think it's still really kind of in draft. We're still waiting for SHPO. So there could be some changes. So it's not really pertinent to show it now when we know we might have, there's a good chance we have some changes coming to it. Maybe minor though, but nonetheless.
Yeah, again, I think that once it goes to the Planning Commission and the City Council, at that point, it's decision time. I mean, that's the reason to have a working committee like this, is to get it to that point. So that would be my preference. Mr. Mays, any thoughts on that?
Well, certainly if the intent of Chairwoman Davenport is to make the Planning Commission aware of how this is moving forward, we can just make sure that they are invited to the public engagement process and the links, and so that they can have that same information at that time. So it's not brought before the Planning Commission formally, but they are looped in on kind of the progress being made.
I guess I was thinking that I don't know if they're watching this, or I don't know how they are getting information of something that's coming down the road. I don't know whose responsibility it is to inform the Planning Commission that, hey, this is on the horizon, just be aware, or I don't know, I guess I'm looking at it as transparency with our fellow committees that are part of the process. But if that's staff's role to let them know, that's fine too. Just was trying to be transparent and not catch them off guard. So.
And again, once again, I think that's the reason we have this working committee. Are they watching? I don't know if they're watching or not. But I think Mr. May's suggestion is if they're interested, there'll be an opportunity.
Sounds great. So I think you have what we discussed and know where to go from here. And I guess my other question, though, is how should we be involved in those presentations? I guess we'll have to schedule those. Is that all? Do all of us have to be a part of that, of those presentations, or?
Well, and I guess to clarify presentation, what I envision with this PowerPoint presentation, that's something that can be handled by staff preparing it and getting it out. And then with the invitation to these two public engagements, we would invite the committee to be there as well. It's not formal, it's informal. You can interact with the public, answer questions, and that would be the opportunity for the committee to participate in that manner.
So you'll keep us informed of some dates to look at, and okay.
Yeah. First step is putting the presentation together and the material and getting that out, and then giving the public sufficient time through the different notifications that we described in holding those meetings.
Question for Attorney Walker. Is the ordinance at a point where it can be posted online? Or how much, I guess I'm looking for your timeline for.
Well, I think, well, we definitely want to get SHPO's input before this is public. I mean, it is public, but I mean, before this is made available for public input, I should say. What we can do, though, in the meantime, is provide a overview, a framework of what the effect of the ordinance would be, that's high level. And I think really the public will benefit most from that, knowing, okay, if you're going to make an alteration to your property, that's going to trigger a certificate of appropriateness review, and you'll have to go through this process. And we could include that flow chart you were recommending on what that would look like. And as soon as the ordinance has been reviewed by SHPO and is sort of ready, we can then publish it and get it out to those that were interested and want to provide that input.
Okay, thank you.
And I think that's where some information needs to be provided to the public to let them know, are you in the historic district or not? You know, there are people who live in older homes here in Boulder City who may believe that this is going to impact them directly, and yet they're not there. So You know, I know there's that list of addresses that's included with the Preservation Committee's packet each meeting. You know, maybe something as simple as that to say, you know, these are the properties that are within the historic district. Consideration. Again, I would leave that up to you how to package that, because too much information is too much information.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you for helping with the outreach and putting that all together. All right. Okay, agenda item 4, for possible action, committee discussion regarding potential agenda items for the next Historic Preservation Ordinance Ad Hoc Committee meeting. I guess our next meeting, should we get just an update on how the planning is going for public outreach? Or do we really need to meet for that? Can you just send us all a message periodically as far as where we are and what's going on?
I think that might be more effective to provide that. Unless there is business the committee needs to conduct, we will be in constant communication letting you know the progress in this outreach effort.
Good. Unless you guys think there's a need to meet?
Well, and again, I think Mr. Mays has a good point. You know, until that process is completed and that information is collected, there's not much actionable for us to do.
I think the only reason we might have to meet is if the SHPO comes back with some substantial changes. And if we need to get together and discuss those, that may be a reason, but that's the only reason I can think of to schedule a meeting. But we won't know until that happens, so we'll just keep our calendars open.
Well, I would suggest that, and I agree with you, I think the direction then would be that the item to be discussed at the next meeting will be the feedback or responses that have been received from SHPO and the public outreach actions. And I don't know if we need to add it then as an agenda item, but you know, possible consideration of the wording of the ordinance. If we're to go back and edit that further.
Well, staff can incorporate the public input into the changes and or point out and have that before the committee to review. Is that what you're proposing?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get an idea of what we need to have on that agenda in order to do that. And of course, we don't have to determine that right now, but I think that's going to be the focus of the next meeting, is what to do with that. You know, maybe an agenda item for how this moves forward to the Planning Commission, you know, discussion of that process.
So I think it would be 2 principal agenda items. The first is you would be revisiting this draft ordinance. Included in that staff report would be feedback from SHPO. And then the second agenda item is a summary of the public outreach effort and what we heard from the community. And with that, a potential agenda item for direction on how to proceed. So, 3 items.
Any other agenda items, comments before we go to final public comments? All right, thanks everyone. All right, so final public comments for our meeting this evening. The The phone number is 702-589-9629. Seeing that there are no comments, this meeting is adjourned.